Okay, today's guest is a man who knows his way around the broadcast business, in the news business. He worked 58 years in this business, including a stint at CNN. In Los Angeles, he's a household name for his years in local TV news there. He's won every award he can possibly win for reporting. This guy has some stories. Settle in for a few of them, and we'll be talking to Hal Eisner right after this.
The following is a Tony Lasano podcast, an Opie show on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. This is the Minutia Man Celebrity Interview with Rick and Dave.
This week it's just Rick, but I have a guest who I'm very excited to talk to. Hello, Hal. How are you?
I'm well, and I see you speak Hawaiian. Hello, Hal.
I do.
You know, well, one of the things that I love about my nickname, my real name is Harold, but what I really love about Hal, which is about 99% of what the world calls me, is how it provides for a great opportunity for self-effacing humor. So my podcast, What the Hal, aloha, as in hello in Hawaiian, mahalo, as in thank you in Hawaiian, and how the hell are you, Rick?
That's pretty good. You know, a lot of things rhyme with Rick, so I'm not going to go there.
Let's not.
So anyway, your book is called An Accidental Career, My 58-Year Adventure as a Broadcast News Reporter. Why accidental?
Well, I think that a lot of things happen to us inadvertently. An accident isn't always getting hit by a car or something like that. An accident can be something you weren't planning on. And in my case, one particular accident, quote unquote, happened when I was in high school. I was in the marching band in high school. I played saxophone, and a local radio station, KLIF in Dallas, the mighty 1190, had a contest, and the contest was send in a postcard and tell us why you want to report your high school football score on Friday night. I thought, what a great way to meet girls. And so I sent in a postcard, and either I was the only one from my school that did that, or they actually randomly pulled my name out of a box, but I won, which is why you and I are having this conversation.
And what year was that?
1966.
Wow.
And so I started on Friday nights giving the high school football score. So it wasn't something I was planning on. I was planning on going to college and going into pre-law and then becoming a lawyer. And that was sort of the course of the career I thought I might have. But instead, this little contest came along, and after giving the high school football score on Friday nights, the guy who collected those reports on the radio station had a little show on a station that was about the power of a light bulb. It was 60 watts at an orphan's home in a suburb of Dallas. And he said, why don't you come on in on Sundays and, you know, bring the newspaper and read a couple of stories for me, and I can take a break, you know.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and then he left the radio station and recommended me for that job. And, you know, one thing sort of led to another. And when I went to college, the first thing that happened was because the administrators knew of my interest in broadcasting, they said, well, you know, we can get you connected with a local radio station, a local TV station, and you can get some date money jobs, girls again. Uh-huh. And so I did that. And all of a sudden I started realizing that, you know what, broadcasting is kind of pulling me in. And at that point I decided to change universities and start going that route. And the rest sort of is history. But it was following instinctively the feeling that something is happening here.
Yeah.
And it's not something I was planning on. It was a detour, an accident, an inadvertent thing that came in front of me as I was going to the intersection of a road, and I went left instead of right. And so I think sometimes we don't recognize that. I think sometimes we don't see the opportunities presented in things that we don't plan on. And sometimes if we paid more attention to those, we might have different outcomes in our lives.
Yeah, I like that. At what point did you see the road turning towards television away from radio?
I never did.
Oh,
I never saw that coming. I thought that, there was a time in radio, it was during the Nixon administration, there was a wage freeze. And I thought, I just can't make any money doing this. I was in a right-to-work state. There were real limitations. And it was becoming very difficult to really get the kind of paychecks I wanted to get. And so a friend of mine, his mother was a headhunter, and said, hey, I can get you a gig with a pharmaceutical company, and you can go detail products to doctors, and you're still using your communication skills. And so I did that for a little while. And as I was doing that, a former news director of mine went to CNN. And he said, why don't you come work for me at CNN? It was a new network. It was a startup.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, how's this going to be any different? But it was television, and it was something that I was kind of a pie in the sky thing. I never thought that could happen to me. And so I said, well, you know what? Okay, I'll give that a shot. And I moved to L.A. and spent 43 years in L.A. When I got to L.A., I didn't think I'd last 2 weeks. I had all these great broadcasters with all this experience in the second largest market in the United States. And here's little Hal, trotting into town with his suitcase. And I knew radio. I didn't know TV.
Well, CNN, and, you mentioned it offhandedly, but as a startup, but it really was. I mean, people don't remember this, but when it first started up, the first comment people would say is, why do we need news 24 hours a day? That's a crazy idea. Isn't that true?
Well, we had it in radio, though.
Yeah, that's true. I know, but for some reason, it was considered a radical idea that you were latching onto there.
Yeah, well, you know what? I was latching onto a pipe dream. Yeah. I thought, me on TV, I had a face for radio.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I was like, you got to be kidding me, and you look at some of those old pictures, and I look like Ron Burgundy. and I didn't find it an easy change at all. I mean, writing for radio is very much writing to the theater of the mind. You're drawing pictures with words. You're saying that the fire that you're covering, the flames are licking out from under the stairwell. In television, the picture shows that, so you've got to find other words to enhance the picture and continue on telling the story.
Yeah.
They're very different kind of science. And I was assured by my mentor, Larry Lamott, who had become the bureau chief and was my news director at a radio station in Fort Worth called KRXV, All News Radio 15. He assured me he'd go out in the field with me and he would help kind of walk me through this a little bit. But we did that for the first day.
One day.
and then I was sort of on my own. But you know what? Sometimes that's the best way. You get thrown in the pool and you see if you can swim to the other side.
I kind of
and
like that.
I made it to the other side. And but it wasn't easy. And but it was through so many people that made a difference in my career. It was a cameraman named Dave Rust, who was somebody I was frequently assigned to, who recognized that I could use a little tip here and there and wasn't offended by help, and would help me with on-camera stand-ups and things that, he thought that maybe I could use a little guidance on. He was a wonderful photographer. And, he's mentioned in the book, he has a little comment. I asked him if he'd make a little comment for the book, and he did. And, but it was people like him that made a difference. It was, Larry that made a difference. There was a guy in radio many years earlier who gave me my first all-news radio gig, which was at KTRH in Houston. And when I was in college, and he was starting up something called the All News Weekend, and he saw something in me that maybe I could do something with that, and so he gave me a shot. And it was people like that who opened doors. And so, it was all these little accidents, all these little things that I didn't plan on, all these little things that happened that were good things. And so at the end of 15 years of radio and, 43 years of television, you had 58 years of a broadcast career that wasn't really planned. That happened.
Hence the title. So, you're a reporter. You're out there in the field reporting on things like earthquakes, wildfires, school shootings, riots. I mean, you must have some stories from putting yourself in danger like that.
Well, yeah. I mean, but it's not just that. It's ribbon cuttings. It's Ferris wheel openings. It's,
sure.
It's all kinds of good things, too.
Yeah.
And, I think that I look at news as like that sort of bulletin board in the hallway that at your office building you walk by every day and you look up to see it. So something with a push pin in it that might be something that you're interested in, like an apartment for rent or a car for sale. And that's what we are. We're kind of an electronic bulletin board where, we provide information. We're also a mirror. We're a mirror that reflects the community. And so when we look into the broadcast mirror, we see what our community is all about. And we know that there are things we like and there are things we don't like. And we know that there are things that shouldn't be changed. And we know that there are things that should be changed. And so as a result, we're a very functional and important part of the community. We, are first responders. We're like police. We're like firefighters. We get out there where the yellow tape is and we tell the stories that people who are too busy at work don't have time to go see for themselves. And so I found, that whether it was the good stories or the bad stories, they were so different every day that there were never 2 days alike. There were days where I would have stories that were just incredibly intense. And people will ask me, what's your favorite story? And I will say, I had many favorite stories, but it's not about the stories. It's about the moments within the stories. So I'm in Houston. Hurricane Harvey is hit. The Fox station there had reporters that were going around the clock, and the network sent in reporters from other stations, local stations from around the country to help give them some relief. I came from L.A. to help out. One of the things I did was on a Sunday morning, a church that had been shredded by a tornado that came out of the hurricane had parishioners out in folding chairs outside of the crumbled church praying.
Oh, wow.
Instead of being able to be inside. And I thought, you know what, I'd love to talk to one of the families sitting there in folding chairs, because, again, a good story, when you can, is told by putting a face on the story. It's not just the who, what, when, where, why, and how. It's the who, what, when, where, why, and how, and who's affected. And so I found this very nice family, mom, dad, and kids, and they agreed to talk to me. And so we're standing outside of this devastated church, and I'm asking them about praying outside and the tornado. And all of a sudden I look down and I notice this little girl, and she's getting very emotional. And there's a picture of this in the book. And all of a sudden, as I'm looking at her saying, "Are you okay? I mean, what's wrong?" She wraps her arms around me, puts her head on my shoulder. She's probably about 11, 12, somewhere in there. And as she's crying, she says, "I was afraid my parents were going to get killed."
Oh, my gosh.
Well, you know what? I remember the hurricane coverage. I remember earthquake coverage.
Yeah.
I remember Columbine. I remember all those things. But it's the people stories, and it's the people in those stories, and it's those moments like that little girl that I'll carry with me forever.
Yeah, that's a great story. I mean, the one thing about being in L.A. that is different, though, than other markets in America is the whole Hollywood side of your career. And, you covered the O.J. trial and the Michael Jackson trial, and
right.
I'm sure those were, to us, watching it
on
TV.
But for clarification, I covered the crime of O.J. Simpson. I did not cover the trial. I covered the trial of Michael Jackson. And just to be clear, I observed it like everybody else. I watched the Dream Team and the prosecutors, and once in a while I'd have an associated story.
Okay.
But it was really more about the crime. But, hooray for Hollywood, right?
Yeah. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Back to Hal. Yeah. But, there were so many great stories, so many interesting people to meet. And the, covering Michael Jackson, covering the O.J. Simpson story were incredible. Yeah. They were incredible to cover.
What about, just like celebrity interviews? I know that you do them like they'd send you out to somebody's house to do a sit-down feature story here and there. Do you have any favorite moments from that sort of thing? Yeah.
I have a whole lot.
Oh, great.
How much time do we have?
Give me your top three.
Well, I love the moment where I was standing on the red carpet covering the Golden Globes a number of years back, and I guess I must have looked a little anxious, and George Clooney was interviewing with a reporter to the right of me, and I think he noticed that, and he tapped me on the arm between questions and said, with a little wink and a nod, "You're next." And I thought, wow. He recognized something about me, but he wanted to take a second while he was talking to somebody else to let me know I'm going to be in good shape. And I thought, what a cool thing to do.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we, that's what we hope for, is that people in their humanity take a moment to acknowledge you.
Because you were anxious because you were worried that you weren't going to have an interview with somebody at that moment.
No,
right?
I had plenty of interviews.
Okay.
I wanted to talk to George Clooney.
Okay,
and,
I gotcha. All right.
I think he may have felt that, I wasn't going to get him.
Yeah.
I mean, others had walked by me because they were busy. They were doing other things.
Sure.
And, you do so many reporters, you're not going to get to everybody in the buffet line.
That's true.
So, I think he recognized that I kind of wanted to talk to him, and he wanted to let me know I was going to get to do that, which I thought was really exceptional on his part. And I've always had a great admiration for him just for that one little thing.
Yeah.
I went to see his play in New York on Broadway, Good Night and Good Luck, when it was running on a limited run a year ago. Yeah. And I was about 3 rows back from the front, and I just, as I'm watching him and, portray Edward R. Murrow and thinking about that day that we had that interview, I remembered that moment. Yeah. And it really resonated with me. It's like that little girl in Houston. It just stuck with me. There was a day when I had an opportunity through a mutual friend to connect with Dick Van Dyke.
Oh, wow.
And I went to his home in Malibu. I had a Sunday show for a number of years. In addition to my daily reporting, it was called Fox 11 News In Depth, and it was one of my very favorite things to do in the studio. And I anchored that, and I went out in the field and sometimes got stories for it. And so I knock on the door of Dick Van Dyke's home, and he opens the door. Dick Van Dyke, blue jeans, shirt tails out, barefoot.
Love it.
No suit, no tie, just down-to-earth Dick Van Dyke, 91 years old. And, he welcomes me into his home with my photographer, and we look at the various things on the wall and the things on the shelves and little figurines of his characters and Mary Poppins and other shows and people he admired, like Stan Laurel from Laurel and Hardy, pictures of him on the wall, and just really lovely stuff, really happy stuff. And, we did some fun things. I mean, he showed me how to do a little soft shoe, and I've got 2 left feet, And that was really cool, Yeah. And remember, this is television. We're taping all this. We're putting this out there, and it's just wonderful, wonderful material to work with. And And then we're doing the interview. And I'm not going to let him get away without doing a duet with me, So we do supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, and we go back and forth on the verses. And it was just, you couldn't buy that.
Yeah.
It was just special. And so I think that, that's another moment that you remember. I mean, there are things like this that are just, they're just special little things that happen. You probably have them in your life.
Yeah,
everybody's got little things. Interviewing Ed Asner, and he'd always say, Eisner, we must be family. Every time we talked, it turned out we were on the SAG-AFTRA National Board together. So, of which I'm still a member of, third term. But, Ed was a delightful man. And, a lot of people like that, a lot of interesting people. And they're people. Above all, they're people. They're not, they're celebrities, but they're real people. And I think that, they laugh and they're sad and they're happy and they're thought-provoking and everything we all are. And I think that, sometimes when you're in a position to do an interview, that's work. And so a person who is in a position to be interviewed, as I am with you, always wants to sort of be on their best behavior. And so I think that, all these people really weren't just on their best behavior. They were really who they were. And they were just delightful, really delightful.
I always thought if you can't be on your best behavior in a situation like that, then you're probably not a nice person. You know what I mean?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, I think that, I think so. But you know what? Let me just take that one more step. My dad was just a wonderful, wonderful man. I miss him so much. And Dad, when he was a little boy in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, took dance lessons at a little synagogue up the street from where he lived. And it was Beth Shalom Synagogue. And he had a teacher named Gene Kelly. And Gene Kelly was 19 years old. And Gene Kelly was doing that to make a little money on the side, maybe a little date money like I was doing in college. And so I had the opportunity to meet Gene Kelly and do an interview for a series I was doing on dancing in Hollywood. And I was so excited. I mean, I was so excited. I couldn't wait for this interview. I thought, God, I'm going to hear something about my dad as a little boy. I was going to hear something about what my dad was like when he was just a little kid. Yeah. Because my dad was invited by him from time to time to go see him when he was performing at the Dallas Theater Center. And he did go backstage, and he and my mom went and visited. So I was sure that he'd have something to say, but he had been sick. Oh. And he was not in a good mood, and he was a bit grumpy, but we all are when we're not feeling good.
Sure.
And it wasn't the pleasant, wonderful, delightful moment that I wanted. It was unfortunate. It was sad because I felt bad for him that he was feeling so bad, but I also kind of selfishly felt bad that I couldn't learn something about my dad as a little boy. So, sometimes these are special moments and they're great, and sometimes they're not so great, but, there's usually reasons behind that.
So, you talk about your mentors. And we all have them in this business. And in fact, if you don't have them, sometimes you have a real hard time making it anyway. But you have taken it to the next step. You're mentoring the next generation of reporters. Tell us about your camp news that you work on.
Well, I'm a believer in passing it forward. I think that we all kind of should have a social responsibility of helping the next person. And just as an aside, I'm with my son one day at a restaurant having breakfast, and we go to the cashier, and the cashier says, "Well, you don't have to pay." I said, "What do you mean?" The cashier says, "Well, that little man that was sitting in the corner with white hair, I don't know if you saw him. He was gone by that point. He paid for your breakfast. He comes in here every week and he buys somebody breakfast. and you were his guest today. And I had no idea. And I thought, what a sweet thing to do.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you go through a coffee drive-through and you buy coffee for the person in the car behind you.
Right.
What a nice thing to do. I don't think we do enough of those things, but that I digress. To answer your question, I felt in a similar way that a lot of people had opened doors for me. Larry Lamott opened doors for me. Steve Edwards, who had a show in Chicago once on TV, and had a show in L.A. on TV, and I worked with not only at KTRH Radio in Houston, where he gave me my first news anchor gig on radio, but also on Fox 11, where he had Good Day L.A., and we worked together. And Steve Edwards opened doors for me. And so there were all these people that made a difference for me, and I believe that you can mentor one-on-one, or you can put a little muscle to it, and, you can do it bigger. And I wanted to do it bigger. We're in Hollywood. And I thought, well, you know what? Let's get a bunch of actors and actresses, makeup artists, special effects makeup artists. Let's invite the LAPD, the LA Sheriff's Department, the fire department. Let's invite all these agencies and their public information officers. And let's create, and this is the only time you'll hear me say these words, fake news.
Yeah.
And we created a fake news story in Malibu Canyon where we had a camp that had dormitory space and catering, and we had kids over for a weekend. And we created this story that they had to cover with the help of these mentors that were coming and volunteering their time from the news business. Reporters, producers, news directors, writers. And that was so popular the first year we did it, in the year 2000, that we added an anchor camp to it. And we partnered with Pepperdine University on the end of the canyon that we were at, and because they had a studio, and we had anchors coming in, and we had the makeup artists, and we did the whole anchor thing too. And in both of these camps, you'd get a copy of your anchoring or reporting, and you could use that to go to a small market somewhere because you've never been on TV or even radio. We added radio in there, and you could show them what you would look like or what you would sound like. And we did that in both English and Spanish. And that is still going on to this day. We do it once a year. We just had the camp in the year 2025 in December. And we'll do it again this year in December. And it's a way to do mentoring, but sort of in IMAX.
Wow, that's cool. So you mentioned fake news.
Yeah.
And as one of the enemy of the people who has been delivering fake news for 40-some or 58 years, what are your thoughts when you hear politicians say crap like that?
I get hives.
Yeah. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
No, but here's the thing. And look, you can't have thin skin in this business.
Right.
Okay? I mean, you can't have thin skin if you're a police officer. You can't have thin skin if you're a firefighter. And you can't have thin skin if you're a politician. You can't. Yeah. You just have to roll with the punches. The bottom line is, I don't know anybody, and you spent time in radio. Do you know anybody who ever faked a story and then put it out on the air?
Not a single time.
Never. So where's the fake news? Right. See, the thing is, we live in a very litigious society. And if you do that, your next step is going to be in front of a judge because somebody's going to sue you.
Right. That's true.
So I never got sued in 58 years. I know plenty of broadcasters that never got sued in their careers because they did the right thing. When you're out doing a story, you get two sources to support each piece of information you're putting out there. At least two, if not more. And you're verifying, you're corroborating. It's the old Jack Webb thing on Dragnet, just the facts, man. Mm-hmm. And you're just trying to verify the facts and corroborate the information and put it out there. And so because there are politicians who have marketed and branded what, politicians have said for years about media. It's become a thing. Yeah. You can find books and lots of books. And when you go to the store to look for mine, I encourage you to go look in the area where the presidential books are. And you'll see that presidents and the press have not really gotten along forever, which is why they have this wonderful National Press Club banquet every year, so they can kind of all get along and get it out of their system and joke around, and the presidents can make fun of whatever, and so, it probably goes back to George Washington and Ben Franklin with his printing press,
right?
That's true. And it's always been that way. I mean, when you can shine a light on somebody and it's not a positive light, they're not going to like you very much. But the fact of the matter is we have a First Amendment. And because we have a First Amendment, we have a responsibility to protect that First Amendment. We have a responsibility to adhere to it. And our job as journalists is to make sure we're getting it right. If we don't get it right, not only don't we have a job anymore, we may not have a career.
Oh, that's perfectly said. So tell everybody where to get the book.
Well, I can tell you that it's on lots of booksellers online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. There's so many of them, Books A Million. There's booksellers I've never even heard of before. But in bookstores, if they don't have it in your bookstore, then just ask them to order it.
Yeah.
Because they all can. It has the appropriate numbers and all the different things that are necessary for book ordering. But, a simple way is just go online and pick it up that way. And I even got these little book plates with little adhesive backs with my little picture on it. And I can even sign your book from afar by just sending you a little book plate if you send me your information in an envelope, and I'll send it right back to you. So, I mean, in today's world, there are all kinds of ways to do all kinds of things, and we have a much smaller society because we're technically connected. And, I hope people will read it. I hope people will learn from it. I hope people will understand a little better about what it is we do as broadcasters. Look, we're student council representatives on testosterone. You'd go to school and you would go to homeroom, and then the student council representative would go to a student council meeting, and then you would go to math class and history class and civics class and whatever class. Then you'd come back to homeroom, and the student council rep would tell you what you needed to know from the student council meeting. That's what I do.
I love that. That's a great way to describe it. So do you have a website, social media where people can follow you?
Well, first of all, I'm all over social media, so it's all under my name, Hal Eisner, and Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, I'm on everything. I love social media, and I think social media is a great window to the world. And there is a site called haleisner.com. And that particular site is a companion. I started this in 2000, 4 years before Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook. Wow. I could have been a visionary, but I wasn't. But it's like I've converted haleisner.com, which back then was sort of my way to get news information out. In fact, on 9/11, people were sending me pictures from New York after the buildings were falling of people running in the streets, and I was putting it on haleisner.com.
Wow.
And that's now been converted to a book companion, and there are video interviews of me on there. There's little articles of me on there, and we will be putting links of podcasts like this on there at some point. But the bottom line is that yes, there is that sort of thing. And do we have time for one more little story?
Yeah, sure.
Well, back in 2021, I got hit by a drunk driver, and that story's in the book as well. But I was doing an interview on Hollywood Boulevard. We were doing an interview with the head of a tour bus company who had was doing a story. We were doing a story about getting out of the pandemic. And an ambulance came by, and the cameraman stopped the camera down for just 1 second. Excuse me, so that the ambulance could go by and the noise wouldn't interrupt what we were doing. And right in that nanosecond, a drunk driver jumps the curb at about 40 miles an hour, hits my cameraman, hits me, hits several tourists, and goes into the front window of a market right across from the Dolby Theater, the Kodak Theater, as it was once known, the Chinese Theater, that very, very popular part of Hollywood. And I had 6 fractured ribs, I had a fractured knee. My cameraman was similarly injured. Tourists were hurt. The SUV ended up in a market, crashing through the window. And the reason I tell this story is because you talked about social media. And I just want to say that for all the criticism and things that are said about social media, and of which much is justified, there is a good side to it. And that good side is that if it hadn't been for social media, I think my recovery might have been a little slower. There were people that from the moment I was face down on the ground, and they were circling me with their smartphones, taking pictures and videos, which was fine. I do that too, right? Mm-hmm. But, they were on my side. They were supporting me. They were saying, "Here, don't get up. You may have broken bones. Wait for the ambulance to get here." And then my social media blew up, just exploded into smithereens. And people worried about me and my cameraman and wishing us well and hoping we're going to be okay. And, that sense of humanity and encouragement, to me, I was going to get back up out of that bed, and I wasn't going to let this drunk driver, who now is behind bars in prison, but I wasn't going to let that drunk driver end my career and cause me to retire early. I was going to get up. I was going to recover. I was going to get back to work. I was going to get back in front of that camera. I was going to show everybody I'm okay. I'm strong. I'm going to survive, and I'm going to retire when I want to. And that's exactly what happened.
That is a great way to end the interview. Thank you, Hal.
Of course, and thank you.
Thanks for being on the show, and hope to talk to you again soon.
I'll be here.
All right, man. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye-bye.
There he is, Hal Eisner. The guy is a legend in Los Angeles. He really is an absolute legend. And as you can tell, a good storyteller. We have people to thank for this show. We need to thank Brandon Herman for scoring us the interview with Hal. Also, thanks to our executive producer, Tony Lasano, with the Opie Shows. Thank you, Tony. We're distributed by Ed Silla with the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. Great Talk Radio isn't dead. It just moved to a better place, RadioMisfits.com. And I'll be back again, and Dave will join me next week. We'll have another interview, a Minutia Men celebrity interview.
The proceeding was a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. Find our other great shows on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at RadioMisfits.com. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of Opie Productions.
Tony, can you shut up?